Hoka has never been afraid to experiment with something weird. And yet, its signature max cushion road shoe, the Bondi, has largely been stagnant for the last several years. This is the Bondi 9, and it's completely changed from top to bottom. But do these changes actually make a difference? It's time to lace up the Bondi 9 and take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kofuzi and I'm an athlete runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys all about the all new Hoka Bondi 9. But before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that was sent to me for the purpose of review, so I did not have to pay for these shoes. However, nobody's paying me to make this video or to include their brand in this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Bondi 9, and let's start with the specs. This is a 43mm stack height shoe with a 5mm drop, giving us 38mm of midsole foam in the forefoot. And I think the biggest story for the Bondi 9 this year is that this midsole foam has finally changed. They've switched it from a compression molded EVA to a supercritical foam EVA. It's also a taller shoe than last year. It gained some height as well. So there's not only a different cushion, but there's more of it as well. Now, to protect all of this midsole foam, we have Hoka's Durabrasion rubber, which comes in a different pattern than what we saw last year in the Hoka Bondi 8. But it is kind of an old school pattern that is very familiar to me and also happens to remind me a lot of Cracklin' Oat Bran, which is a cereal that I used to eat when I was a very young kid. I was a very strange kid. Now moving to the upper, we have Hoka's structured knit. So it is a very soft, meshy material, but it is also supported and reinforced by overlays, stitching, embroidery, and lots of areas of knit that are not mesh that are going to be stronger and more resilient. There is a decent amount of padding on the tongue and through the heel collar. It's not the puffiest shoe that's on the market in this max cushion category, which I appreciate, but there's still plenty of comfort in here. And then one of the big changes for me this year that I noticed is that there's this new 3D molded collar, which feels really nice to touch. And I feel like it looks great. They've changed the shape of the back of the heel as well. Instead of it cupping like a normal traditional running shoe, now it ends in this Achilles flare. And there is a very significant heel cup back here in order to lend some more structure to the back of the shoe. Now, when it comes to sizing, I typically always use my same regular shoe size across the vast majority of shoes that I test. But for the last few years, I've been sizing up in the Bondi, and that's been working really well for me. When Hoka sent me this pair of shoes, I asked them to size me up to a 9.5 versus my usual US men's size 9, and I was very happy with the way that the shoe fit and felt underfoot. So I'm going to recommend to most people to size up in the Bondi 9. Now altogether, this shoe comes in lighter than it was last year. Hoka reports that this comes in at 10.5 ounces or 297 grams. Now that we've talked about what this shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what it's like on the road. The Hoka Bondi was a shoe in desperate need of an update, and I'm pretty happy with how this shoe has modernized. The supercritical foam is very noticeable when you first put the shoe on. There's so much more step-in comfort. You can really feel the squishiness in the shoe when just walking around. But when it comes to running, the squishiness seems to kind of fade just a little bit. It's still very much a Bondi. So if you've been loving the Bondi, don't worry, they haven't completely changed the shoe on you, but it definitely feels like a much more modern, a much more updated experience. I think a lot of that is coming from the fact that it still has a very Bondi silhouette in terms of the footprint. It's a very wide footprint here. And the way that they're working with the rubber, pushing it all the way to the edges of the shoe really emphasize how blocky this piece of midsole is. And the experience that I'm feeling underfoot is almost like it's a two-layer kind of foam. I'm feeling the squishiness of that supercritical foam on kind of like an outer layer basis, but instead of it squishing all the way and giving me a full range of motion, it feels like it squishes a little bit and then bumps into a more dense core of foam. And so I'm getting a little bit of squish, not as much as it would suggest from how it feels walking around. And to me, that was a little bit disappointing, but I understand how that would be a huge departure from what the Bondi has always been and could really alienate the Bondi faithful. And so what we have here is a shoe that is a little bit softer, especially on the beginning of the impact when your foot hits the ground or anytime you're walking around in the shoe. But there is still a very stable and very predictable core of foam there that keeps the shoe from getting too wobbly. Now, in a recent interview that I listened to from Believe in the Run, I believe it was the product line manager that noted that one of the things that they wanted to change about the Bondi for version 9 was its reception amongst Hoka's pro athletes. And they realized that their pro athletes weren't reaching to this max cushion shoe for the kinds of things that you would normally reach for a max cushion shoe. They weren't using it. And so they wanted to make changes to the Bondi to make it more suitable for what the pros were looking for. And I think that's another way of saying they needed to modernize and update the Bondi to make it really a runner's shoe again. And I think that the changes to the Bondi 9 are gonna push the shoe in that direction. I'm not sure it fully gets them there in version 9. And I have two thoughts on this. One might be because to really get it to where it needs to be, I think would be a pretty drastic change. And so that's the kind of change that a brand usually makes over 2, sometimes even 3 iterations of a shoe. So we might just be kind of part 1 of a 2-part change of the Bondi, or this might be a recognition that really the Bondi moves numbers and it really sells for people that want the Bondi as it is, for people that are running in a shoe and want something that's taller but still firm, stable, and predictable, or people that are not using it for running, maybe they're using it for run, walk, or just walk. And so it leaves me with the question of, is this part of the way that they're going to be changing the Bondi, or is this as far as they're willing to take it? We'll have to see as future iterations of this shoe develop. But in the meantime, for us non-elites who want to use this shoe for running, the Bondi 9 is stable, it's predictable, and it's much more cushioned thanks to that updated supercritical foam. Before we wrap up the video, let's take a moment to step back and zoom out just a little bit, and we'll see where the Bondi 9 fits within the broader Hoka lineup. Now, whenever I start talking about a brand, I want to start with the Daily Trainer, and from Hoka, that is the Clifton 9. This is a shoe that you've probably heard of before, and if you've never tried a Hoka, this is the best place to start. It's a great example of what the brand is all about. It gives you a nice, comfortable, cushioned daily training experience, and this shoe is going to be good for most of your running on most of your days. And then the Bondi 9 fits in as the max cushion shoe, so something that you want to be a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more protected from the road. The Bondi 9 is going to give you that cushion and comfort. It's a lot more plush of an upper, a more comfortable experience. So recovery runs, very easy runs, or long runs where you're just trying to get time on feet, the Bondi 9 is going to be great for you. Now, before we move on, I think we got to talk about a couple of other daily trainers that Hoka has. There's a couple that exist in a either side-by-side or an either-or kind of arrangement for Hoka. And so one shoe that I want to talk about is something that's relatively new, is the Skyflow. This to me feels a lot like the Clifton 9, except that the Skyflow is a little bit more stabilized. It's not quite a stability shoe, but it does have some design elements that make it a little bit more firm on the medial side. So if you do have a problem with crashing in as your foot hits the ground, the Skyflow is probably going to feel a lot more comfortable to you than the Clifton 9 is. And I would use this in an either or. They're very much the same shoe, just depends on what level of stability or motion control that you want. And then another daily trainer that Hoka makes is the Mach. This is Mach 6. The Mach series, since version 4, which was several years ago now, has been my favorite Hoka shoe. It's light, it's springy, it's bouncy, it's fast. This can be a daily trainer, and this is how I typically use it, as a daily trainer, but it's so peppy and nimble that it can also serve as the tempo shoe. So for some of your workouts, the Mach 6 can fit in. So some people's rotations might have the Clifton and the Mach. Some people, it's going to be an either or. I'll leave this in the tempo shoe category for now, because the other shoe that I would typically put into the tempo category is the Rincon. When that first came out, that definitely felt like it fit in the tempo shoe category, but I haven't tested it in the last couple of years and it seems to be taking a little bit of a different direction. So let's leave the Mach 6 as like the daily trainer slash tempo shoe in this lineup. And so I think this is where the Bondi fits in kind of the daily training shoes. Now, there's a lot of other shoes that Hoka makes, and I think that we can kind of talk about that now, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. Hoka makes a line of shoes called Cielo X, and those are typically race shoes, and historically, they have been track shoes. And so the first Cielo X's that I experienced were the Cielo X MD, which is what this is. It's a track spike made for middle distance, and then there's a Cielo X LD that is for a little bit of a longer distance in terms of sprinting. And so these are race shoes. And then after the Cielo X MD and LD came out was the Cielo Road. And so it takes kind of that same track spike feel and approach, but puts it in a road racing package. And that I would use for like a road mile, road 5K, maybe up to a road 10K, very, very short, fast racing. And then we have the Cielo X1, which is a race shoe, but it is the marathon version of that. So a lot more cushion, a lot more stack height. Of these Cielo X shoes, the Cielo X spikes and the Cielo X1 are plated and the Cielo Road is not. So that's what the Cielo series is. And let's put this over here just for a moment, because there's another race shoe that you can think about from Hoka, and that is the Rocket X. It does have a carbon fiber plate. It has the X designation, although X doesn't necessarily mean carbon fiber plate. And so this is the shoe that would fit into the race category, as would the Cielo X1. So if you're a road marathoner, you're probably going to pick one or the other. You might get both of them because they are different and they do have different strengths and weaknesses, but both of them fit into this marathon race position. Personally, I prefer the Cielo X1. I know the Cielo X2 is almost out now. Some people are getting chances to review it. I don't have that in yet, so we'll talk about the Cielo X1, but there are a couple of other shoes that are at least newer and gaining some popularity I think we still need to talk about. We talked about the Mach 6 already, and there is the Mach X. And so the X designation here doesn't mean carbon because this has a plastic plate inside, but is using elevated foams, at least some elevated foams. There's some PIBA in the top layer, this white layer of foam here. And it's marketed and positioned as more of like a race-ready version of the Mach or a speedier version of the Mach, but the Mach is already kind of a speedy daily trainer, somewhat of a tempo shoe in my mind. And when I run in this shoe, it just feels like a stabilized version of the Mach to me. So in my mind, people should pick either the Mach 6 or the Mach X. If you want a little bit more motion control side to side and want a little bit more firmness and stoutness in the heel, then the Mach X, this is Mach X2, is your choice. If you want your shoe to be a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more nimble, a little bit more light, go with the Mach 6. And then we also have the Skyward X. Now, a moment ago, we were talking about the Sky Flow, and that could be a replacement for the Clifton. And I feel like if the Sky Flow is your shoe as far as daily trainers go, then the Skyward X is your shoe instead of the Bondi. Now, they put a lot of high-tech foams in here. They put a very unique H plate in here that's made out of carbon fiber. And they've been positioning it as kind of this performance shoe, but it's very big, very cushioned, and a little bit chunky in my opinion. And so it just really feels like a Bondi X, if you ask me. Now there is a Bondi X shoe, and I've asked Hoka why this isn't the Bondi X2, but they decided to go with Skyward X, and I think that it's a stabilized version of the kind of underlying shoe. So if you need a little bit more stability and a little bit more stoutness, then I would say go with the Mach X and the Skyward X. If you want more of a just kind of a standard neutral, then you go with the Bondi 9 and the Mach 6. And if you don't need light stability in your daily trainer, I would again put the Clifton 9 back into that daily training position. And so based on what I like, this is the rotation from Hoka that I would put together. Now let's wrap up this video by going over the buying guide, and we'll also discuss some alternatives. The Hoka Bondi 9 is all new, and in my opinion, it's improved, but it doesn't completely lose touch with its tall stack height, firmer than it looks roots. if you've tried the Bondi in the past and thought it was just a bit too firm for you, this might be the year to at least give the shoe a try on in the store. But if you've loved the Bondi in the past, I think you're still going to love it now. However, at $170, I feel like the shoe is a bit on the expensive side, a little bit more than we can just blame on inflation. There are some versions of the Bondi 8 and 7 still floating around. Those retail at $165, and you can find some discount versions of those at about $120. And I think the way to decide on which Bondi you should get, I think, is going to be, if you like the old Bondi the way that the Bondi has been, find the old versions, go and stock up on those while you can. But again, if the Bondi hasn't worked for you and you're curious, or if you've never tried a Bondi before, go with the updated version. I think you're going to be happier there. But now let's take a look at some of the alternatives and see where the competition sits. I think the shoe that right now is the closest to what the Bondi is offering comes from Under Armour, and this is the Infinite Elite. Now I know the Infinite Elite 2 is out. I do have it in for testing. I haven't put together my review on that yet. So let's talk about the original, the first version of the Infinite Elite. This is using a different kind of foam, a beaded TPU, but there are a lot of things that are similar in terms of the approaches of the Bondi and the Infinite Elite. They're both big chunks of foam, very tall stack height, very cozy uppers with lots of material and lots of padding on it. And I would look to each of these shoes for the same kinds of runs on the same kinds of days. I think neither of these shoes is going to win a beauty contest, but because they have similar amounts of comfort, yet the Infinite Elite is a little bit peppier, I would probably lean towards that shoe if I were to pick between the two. Plus, the Infinite Elite comes at a discount, coming in $10 cheaper at $160. And the last shoe that I want to talk about is a recommendation for people who maybe don't want to see all these changes in their Bondi. If you want a shoe that's more like the Bondi 8, but maybe you're having a hard time finding inventory of that shoe, I think something you should look to is from Topo, and this is the Atmos. When I reviewed this shoe, I felt like this is a shoe that the Bondi should have been back at the Bondi 8. It has a lot of Bondi-like features, a lot of Bondi-like comfort, and it has the stability and predictability that the Bondi also has. I do think that it is a bit softer than the Bondi 8 was, and if I were to rank them against the Bondi 8 and 9, I'd say it kind of goes like Bondi 8, Topo Atmos, and then Bondi 9. So it kind of bridges the gap between the 8 and 9. And for those of you who don't want to go as far as the Bondi 9 is going, this is going to be the one for you to pick. Plus, Topo is known for having anatomical toe boxes. They're a little bit wider. And so if you want a little bit more room for your feet, the Atmos is definitely something you should look at. And this shoe comes in, again, at a $10 discount from the Bondi at $160. So those are my thoughts on the Hoka Bondi 9. Definitely improvement. Very happy to see how it's changed, but it remains to be seen whether this is just one stop along a long line of changes, or if this is as far as the Bondi is willing to go. If you have any other questions about this shoe, feel free to put them in the comments down below, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Mondays and Thursdays over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to talk to you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?